Before this video starts, I want to make it clear that this is not a hate video towards Ubisoft. There's plenty of those already out there on YouTube. This is a video that's focused on 3 of their franchises, and me voicing my personal concerns and constructive feedback. Now that I've said all of that, let's get right into the video. I remember the first time I saw the Assassin's Creed 2 title card appear with the Ezio's family soundtrack playing in the background, or that moment I first encountered Vaas in Far Cry 3 with his chilling definition of insanity, or even experiencing the dark and atmospheric story of Watch Dogs 1. I'm not ashamed to say that I grew up on Ubisoft games since 2007. It's no secret by now that we all know Ubisoft back in the day had incredibly written stories and a lot of ambition in their games. But you see, somewhere and somehow along the way something changed. Today, it feels like the ambition and dedication they once put into these 3 franchises have suddenly gone, replaced by repetitive formulas, poorly written stories, technical issues, and more recently, a lot, and I mean a lot of drama. You know, even if you're one of the biggest Ubisoft haters in the entire world, I'm sure you can admit their games once upon a time were pretty great. When you think of the most hated video game studios, there's always a debate on this topic. A quick Google search reveals that most people rank either EA or Activision right at the top. However, over time, Ubisoft is creeping into more people's top 3 lists, and not for the right reasons. Now, this video will not focus on things such as NFTs, workplace drama, or controversy, or things along those lines. If you want to see somebody hating on Ubisoft without any logical reasoning, go watch one of those anti-woke YouTube channels that are floating around recently. In this video, I want to focus specifically on 3 of their most popular franchises: Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, and Watch Dogs. So how did Ubisoft go from developing games within these franchises that a lot of people at one point loved, to releasing games that not many people enjoyed, to the point where people refer to Ubisoft as Ubislop? Why do Ubisoft hate their own games? And most importantly, is it possible for them to get back to where they once were? You probably read the title of this part of the video, and the short answer is yes and no. Assassin's Creed has not really declined, it's just a very fluctuating franchise, and it also depends on what type of person you are and if you're open to change. Before I continue with this part, I have to reiterate that I love all Assassin's Creed genres, whether it's the old style or the new style. I'm also not an old gamer, nor am I young. I'm in my mid-20s, which shock I guess now you know, and all I can do is talk about the games I grew up with. One of the biggest ones has to be Assassin's Creed 2, which released in 2009, and this game took us on a journey to Renaissance Italy. This game not only addressed many of the gameplay issues from the 2007 original, but also emerged as an almost perfect sequel in nearly every aspect. When I think of sequels in video games that are 10 out of 10, I think of Assassin's Creed 2, alongside the likes of Red Dead Redemption 2, Arkham City, Mass Effect 2, among others. These are games that built upon the first game and made it better. Assassin's Creed 2 was a game that was not just about running around rooftops with cool parkour moves, though that was amazing. It was the entire package: the historic setting, the gripping story, the combat, parkour, stealth, and of course Ezio Auditore, who very quickly became a fan favorite. In fact, Ezio is a character that a majority of gamers in general would know of, simply because of how well written of a character he is. That's what good writing does. This might sound harsh, but nobody in 20 years time will say the same for somebody like Eivor from Assassin's Creed Valhalla or Basim from Mirage. These are at best okay characters. Also, Ezio's story did not just stop at Assassin's Creed 2. He has his own trilogy, he has a short film about him, and he's also referenced in many of the other games. One main reason he's a fan favourite is because we saw so much of him, which some may say is unfair, but hey, I don't do hypotheticals on if other characters would have also been as good if they had more screen time too. I speak on literal evidence. After Assassin's Creed 2, there was Brotherhood and Revelations, 2 more games featuring ezio. This was also during a moment in Ubisoft's development where key figures such as Patrice Désilets had been fired by Ubisoft, despite being the literal creator of the Assassin's Creed franchise. Ironically, a lot of people say this resulted in the downfall of the Assassin's Creed franchise, which I guess you can make a solid argument for. And then after the Ezio trilogy, the best way to describe the state of Assassin's Creed after the Ezio era is fluctuating. Every game since then has been hit or miss. Assassin's Creed 3 had its fans and critics. The same goes for Black Flag. Unity was a mess at launch. Syndicate had terrible sales. Origins was the change that they offered. And the ones that followed all the way to Mirage were hit and miss. You see, unlike the first 4 games, which were once universally loved, and at that time you would barely see a hater, the later entries have been divisive, with no single game being unanimously praised by everybody at the same time. Just look at it this way. When you see fans or YouTubers give their ranking of every Assassin's Creed game, there's not one single ranking that's ever going to be the same. That's how fluctuating each game is, and how different opinions are. You cannot really say the same for the likes of Far Cry, where everybody can clearly see that Far Cry 6 is a weaker entry compared to Far Cry 3 and 4. Same with Watch Dogs 1 compared to Legion. Whereas with Assassin's Creed, a lot of people love Valhalla but hate Assassin's Creed 2, and it's vice versa. That's why the Assassin's Creed community is easily one of the most divisive out there. Then there's a noticeable decline in motion capture and animation since Origins. Why are games like Odyssey, Valhalla and Mirage so poorly done in terms of mocap? This is Ubisoft we're talking about, one of the most successful in terms of revenue. They have everything at their disposal, and yet they released these 3 games with the worst mocap and facial animations in the entire series by far. Just look at Baldur's Gate 3, Detroit Become Human and Horizon Forbidden West. These games feature an obscene amount of dialogue choices, yet they still manage to include motion captured cutscenes, and as I said, Ubisoft have everything at their disposal, be it budget, and their obvious previous use of motion capture. It's clear that they have the resources. It seems they're just cutting costs out of greed. Let's take a look at a completely random cutscene from Assassin's Creed 2, a game released in 2009. Just take a look.
You'll be alright. The worst is past.
Ti venissi cancero, brutto bastardo! A te e che la grandissima troia di tua madre!
Thank you. Rosa is most dear to me. If I had lost her...
It's little things like the expression on their faces, the tone in their voices, the movement of their body, the writing and whatnot. You can see there's clear effort put into it. Now compare that to this completely random cutscene from Assassin's Creed Odyssey, a game released in 2018.
You're not hard to track.
Did you come alone? Are you alright? Alexios, you're alive!
I mean, it's self-explanatory. Also, before anyone says, well, Odyssey is a much larger game, so they cannot mocap every scene. Well, that cutscene you just watched is part of the main story, and if mocap is not even present in the main story, then God forbid we take a look at the side quest cutscenes. You know, I'm making this video before Assassin's Creed Shadows is released, and I hope to God the mocap is better in a lot of the cutscenes, because I'll be massively disappointed. But to be fair, with the gameplay showcase that they revealed, it does look improved upon. But then again, am I deluded or optimistic at this point? That's the problem when you grow up in a franchise you love. You cannot separate yourself from it. The second franchise I want to talk about in regards to why Ubisoft hates their own games is the Far Cry franchise. Now, I am going to eventually rank all of the Far Cry games in a future video, so look out for that. The peak of Far Cry is evidently Far Cry 3. I did play Far Cry 1 when it was developed by Crytek, and that game was a beautiful game at that time, but I want to focus on Far Cry from 3 and onwards. Take a look at this scene.
Did I ever tell you what the definition of insanity is? Insanity is doing the exact same fucking thing over and over again, expecting shit to change. That is crazy.
That right there was Vass describing exactly what the Far Cry franchise is. The definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting something to change. Now don't get me wrong, that's also a good thing. I don't know about you, but I buy Far Cry because I know what I'm getting myself into, and I enjoy it. If you buy a Far Cry game expecting a different style of game, then I don't know what to tell you. That's like buying a Yakuza game expecting it to be different. That's never going to happen. So Far Cry 3. This game came out in 2012. It's a game that's set on a wild tropical island, and the focus was not a straight up shooter game, but it was a narrative masterpiece. And I don't throw the word masterpiece around easily. It introduced us to a villain named Vass, one of the most unforgettable villains in gaming history, that was portrayed excellently by Michael Mando. Bit off topic, but who remembers the marketing that Far Cry 3 had before its release? I still think to this day that's Ubisoft's best marketing campaign for any of their games to this date. Anyway, the fact that Ubisoft managed to write a villain that's first off not even the main villain of Far Cry 3, that belongs to Hoyt, which a lot of people would overlook, but also writing a truly memorable one shows how much ambition and effort went into this game. The open world freedom, interesting storyline, and the thrill of exploring such a dangerous, unpredictable island made it a standout. In fact, Ubisoft said themselves that Far Cry 3's island is the second most important character in the game. And let's face it, when we finished Far Cry 3, we wanted more Far Cry. I know I did, so I was so excited for Far Cry 4. Was I disappointed? Absolutely not. Far Cry 4 was a step up in my opinion to gameplay compared to Far Cry 3. The amazing setting in Kyrat with the stunning backdrop of the snowy mountains, the weapons, the vehicles, the choices, and hell, I would even say that Pagan Min, the villain of Far Cry 4, is just as good as Vass. So evidently at this point, Far Cry 3 was the blueprint Ubisoft needed, and Far Cry 4 was an extended version of that blueprint. It seemed up and up for me. And then there was Far Cry 5, and this is where things started to get a bit questionable in Ubisoft's decisions. We went from Jason Brody in Far Cry 3 being a pretty complex protagonist protagonist, I recommend watching this video which does a great job on his character, to RJ Gale also being a great protagonist, to then, let's just say, a nobody in Far Cry 5. Ubisoft saw the previous two games were successful, so they thought let's just mess it up for no reason, and take out what made these two games good, and implement a voiceless, non-existent main character. This to me was a silly idea because when you do this, you put an absurd amount of pressure on the side characters and villains to perform, and thank God they did, because I liked Far Cry 5. This is definitely unpopular, but in my opinion, Joseph Seed is the greatest Far Cry villain in this franchise. So that's back to back to back 10 out of 10 villains. But you see, the villains in this franchise were never the issue, let's be honest. That's one great thing about the Far Cry franchise. You can always rely on a great villain portrayal. I found the cult side of Far Cry 5 intriguing, but Ubisoft held back too much. They turned what could have been a strange right-wing religious death cult in Montana into a multiracial group. What they should have done personally to make this game even better was actually introduce a protagonist with a backstory and a clear objective, just like the previous games did. Jason Brody's initial journey was to escape the island with his companions he came with. RJ Gale's initial journey was to bring the ashes of his mother to their homeland. Far Cry 5 could have been a lot better if the protagonist, who is named Rook, had an actual motive and a reason to get out of Montana safely. This would have allowed for a much more intense story. Unfortunately, we ended up with a fairly generic story, but thank God the villain, the world and the soundtrack, believe it or not, carried it, I guess. And then there was the one that was just not it, and that was Far Cry 6. The development and marketing of this game seemed so promising. It reminded me of Far Cry 3's marketing in a way, with how they set up both villains. We literally had Gus from Breaking Bad, aka Giancarlo Esposito. How could a game fumble this bad when you have one of the greatest villains in TV history period? Well, unlike previous Far Cry games where stealth was important, it feels almost irrelevant now. Weapons like the bow feel unnecessary, sniper rifles aren't as effective, and sidearms are frustratingly sticky when aiming. Most of the characters are unlikable with too much to say. The bad comedy just stands out, and the game doesn't take itself seriously, except for a few disjointed moments. The third-person cutscenes also disrupt the immersion, making it feel like I'm playing a different game. Far Cry is not known for third-person, so the fact that they even attempted to try that out was a bit stupid. The guns don't feel satisfying, possibly due to spongy enemies. All of these issues, tedious resource collection, limited stealth mechanics, unlikable characters, unsatisfying combat, and so on, accumulate to make Far Cry 6 one of the least liked in the series. It detracts from the essence of what made Far Cry great. A lot of us fell in love with Far Cry because of the characters and clear objectives. The thing with Far Cry 6 is that this game acknowledges this but fails to execute it. For example, in Far Cry 3, remember that scene where we have a flamethrower and we're burning plants down with dubstep playing in the background? Far Cry 6 does this too, but it's so forced and in your face that it's like the game wants you to say to yourself, oh, I remember this from Far Cry 3. It's just forcing nostalgia onto you for no reason. Now that brings me on to Far Cry 7 because believe it or not, there is a Far Cry 7 in the works. And from the snippets and rumors that are circling around, it sounds interesting. Is this Ubisoft's last chance at making a great Far Cry game? Maybe. So if you don't know, Far Cry 7's rumored plot is focused around saving family members from kidnappers, which is quite similar to Far Cry 3, so make of that what you will. I just hope Ubisoft respects what the franchise once was, and makes the actual protagonists interesting and a clear objective towards them. That's what makes Far Cry good. The last Ubisoft franchise I want to talk about is Watch Dogs, another franchise that Ubisoft decided to destroy for no reason at all. First off, who remembers E3 in 2012 and the Watch Dogs 1 situation that unfolded? Well, if you don't know, Ubisoft took the stage and unveiled Watch Dogs 1 at E3 with a gameplay demo that seemed graphically incredible. And when I say graphically incredible, I mean it. The demo consisted of impressive graphics, innovative hacking mechanics, and a richly detailed open world Chicago that felt quite alive with NPCs and dynamic weather it seemed. The lighting, the shadows, the textures, it all looked ahead of its time at that moment. It painted a dark atmospheric picture of futuristic Chicago, and instantly everybody was hooked and wanted the game. Fast forward to May 2014, Watch Dogs finally was released, and I, like many others, could not wait to dive in. But as soon as I started to play the game, something felt off. The game did not quite match up to what we saw in that E3 demo. Now, I'm not saying the graphics are bad at all. In fact, it's a great looking game. But when you advertise a game that looks almost nothing like what it was at E3, is that even legal at this point? It just seems so wrong legally somehow. The textures were not as sharp, the lighting was not as dynamic, and the overall environmental details seemed lacking. The gameplay mechanics, while still cool, didn't feel as polished or innovative as they had in that demo. But enough about the E3 situation. That's just the start of the Watch Dogs franchise. The actual game itself was very good. It was a game that featured a darker and more traditional story structure, kind of similar to something of the Nolan Batman films. Watch Dogs 1 still managed to build a dedicated fanbase and showed potential for the future. It had a great story, a great protagonist, a great gameplay loop, and it was a new franchise. Now fast forward 2 years and in my opinion the best Watch Dogs game was released. Ubisoft took the feedback from the first game seriously and came back strong with Watch Dogs 2 in 2016, but putting my favoritism aside, the game was definitely not the most well received by fans. Think about it. We went from a very dark Chicago and dark story to the literal complete opposite with bright blue skies, San Francisco, and a more human-driven story. The game introduced us to a new protagonist, Marcus Holloway, who brought a dose of charisma and energy. The game's tone was lighter, the characters were more involved, and the overall experience felt more cohesive. For me, it was a breath of fresh air and a step in the right direction for this franchise. Surely nothing can go wrong at this point, right? Well, you see, this is Ubisoft we're talking about. Something that you loved in their games years ago will be removed. Fast forward to 2020 and we have Watch Dogs Legion. On paper, Watch Dogs Legion sounds pretty good. The ability to recruit and play as any NPC in London was a bold and ambitious idea. The game promised unparalleled freedom with each character bringing unique abilities and backgrounds to the table. However, it just struggled to deliver on its grand vision. While the concept of a playable population was certainly interesting, it led to a lack of a main compelling protagonist. Yep, that sounds like Far Cry 5, a game without a compelling protagonist. I don't really know why Ubisoft are so adamant on having a game without a protagonist. You know, don't be surprised if Assassin's Creed in the future somehow does not feature a main protagonist. Anyway, back to Watch Dogs Legion. The story felt fragmented, and the emotional connection that we used to have with characters like Aiden Pierce and Marcus Holloway was missing. The gameplay, while at first seemed cool, very quickly became repetitive. A great example I can give to you is the use of drones and spider bots. You see, at first these tools are exciting and you have new ways to tackle missions. However, it soon becomes apparent that you can bypass most challenges by simply flying a construction drone, deploying a spider bot, and completing objectives remotely. It not only undermines the game's literal challenge, but also becomes so monotonous. So yeah, in the end, Watch Dogs Legion just struggles with this ambitious premise. The ideas are there, but the execution is just not it, resulting in a game that feels more like a missed opportunity than a groundbreaking achievement. How many times have I or other people that speak about Ubisoft games say the phrase wasted potential? It's so common with Ubisoft games. You know, for a series with so much potential, Watch Dogs Legion serves as a reminder that bigger is not always better, and without a compelling story, even the most interesting concepts on paper can fall flat. So what's next for the Watch Dogs games? Well, the short answer is nothing. Ubisoft seemed to abandon the franchise, video game wise. How stupid is that? One bad game with bad sales and it seems like they shut up shop. Instead, we're getting a Watch Dogs movie, which I can already tell will be pretty bad considering the track record of video game adaptations, and even Assassin's Creed 2016. You know, there is nobody to blame for the death of the Watch Dogs franchise besides Ubisoft, and it's just disappointing is all you can really say. So that brings me on to the real question. Can Ubisoft be a video game studio that they once were years ago, where they had a good reputation and their games were amazing? Well, first off, what actually brings me to this opinion? Well, it's the recent games being bloated, mechanically lifeless, and overly reliant on open world formulas. Despite this, I do truly believe that there's a glimmer of hope that Ubisoft can return to its former glory. I mean, not that this holds any weight, but Ubisoft said themselves after Mirage's successful launch that they will make great games again. But take that with the tiniest grain of salt you could ever hold. Anyway, here's what Ubisoft needs to do to become a great video game studio again. First off, they need to understand the current sentiment, which is a sentiment that's definitely mixed. Many people feel that Ubisoft games have become such a generic and formulaic mess, which is a valid opinion to have. Games like Watch Dogs Legion and the latest Assassin's Creed games have caught a lot of flack for just being so boring to play and stuffed with so much extra content that it detracts from the main experience. What Ubisoft needs to focus on is a world that's not too large and a world that's not full of bloat. They also need to focus on a narrative that's truly memorable. To me, the story is what makes a game good. That's my number one priority. That's why games like What Remains of Edith Finch is in my top 10 of all time. Oh, and I'm speaking about the Assassin's Creed series, by the way. But judging by Assassin's Creed Shadows gameplay and information, it does seem like they are focusing on less and focusing on quality. But we'll have to wait and see. Come back to this video in a year and just be disappointed if it's the usual. It's about putting quality over quantity and making sure every mission and game mechanic has a purpose and is fun to play. Ubisoft have been called out for cramming their games with too many unnecessary side quests and collectibles that often feel like filler instead of adding real value. Take a look at Far Cry 3 and Far Cry 4. There was no filler at all in these two games. It was peak from start to finish. Go back to that. Stop putting unnecessary bloat and filler into your games to make playtime longer. Another thing Ubisoft needs to do to return to past glory is by reviving beloved franchises. One of the most commonly expressed desires among fans is the revival of franchises like Splinter Cell and Prince of Persia. But the good news is, a month ago, as I've been making this video, Ubisoft did announce the return of Prince of Persia with Sands of Time. So that's actually pretty hopeful. There's also the Splinter Cell series which has a dedicated fanbase. The audience is yearning for a return to its stealth roots, as seen in classics like Chaos Theory. The announcement of a Splinter Cell remake by Ubisoft Toronto has kind of sparked up a bit of hope, but it's been nearly 3 goddamn years and there's no update for that. Oh, and this one might be a bit tricky for Ubisoft to do, but they need to be truthful with what they say and actually watch what they say. This is also related to the whole Assassin's Creed Shadows controversy, with how they kind of backtracked a lot in their words in interviews. There's really no need to lie, just be truthful, that's all. Even the whole Skull and Bones being a quadruple A game, I don't really know what possessed the CEO of Ubisoft to say that. Was it a dare? These are things you only say when you're confident, and I'm not sure Skull and Bones was anything to be confident about. And yes, I played it, but I don't know, I grew up on Ubisoft games since 2007 and I loved all of them until some of the more recent ones. This is a video game studio that is not the most respected right now, and it's a shame to see. So here's the hoping, I guess. Anyway, if you did enjoy this video, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and with that said, I'll see you in the next one.